There's a park in Paris, France, that used to be a lovely place where people gathered with their families and enjoyed the fresh air. There's also a playground with a swing set and a slide, but it's sat mostly unused since the 1970s, when locals started seeing the woman in white stalking their children. There is a grand house that borders the park, and over the course of the last 200 years or so, families who have lived in that house have experienced great tragedies losing their children. In a memoir penned by Colette Moreau, who lived in the house for only 2 years, she described what happened to her. The house seemed to have a heaviness over it from the day we moved in. At first, Nicholas didn't believe me. He thought we just needed to bring some life into the house. And we did. We had 2 beautiful baby girls. And then suddenly, things became frightening. The babies would cry all night, suddenly restless when left alone, and we would find their blankets covering them in a dangerous way. The windows in and around the nursery would break without any reason, and Nicholas would have to hire somebody to fix them almost constantly. We couldn't understand why we would find the glass in the cribs when the babies were nowhere near the windows. One evening, as I approached the nursery, I saw a woman in a long white dress leaning into my little Marie's crib. My footsteps must have alerted her, and she disappeared before I could enter. When I reached the nursery, she was gone. I thought she was a servant at first, but servants don't disappear into thin air. I found my little girl's bedclothes wrapped around her neck. What could have happened if I had not been there? I told Nicholas that we needed to flee the house, that we were not safe. Nicholas thought I was being a worried new mother until he saw her too. I woke one night to the sounds of Nicholas speaking. He was whispering quietly. When I turned around, I saw him standing at the foot of the bed, his arms embracing the shape of a woman in a white dress. Sitting up, I could see her better in the moonlight. She had a terrifying, undead face, and Nicholas was kissing her neck, oblivious to me in the room. I called to him, and she turned and growled at me. Then she disappeared. He looked at me with wide eyes, as though he had woken from a trance. I told him what I had seen, and he was disgusted, saying he thought he had been embracing me. That very night he agreed to move. We hurried the servants to pack and planned to leave in 3 days' time. I sent for the priest. He blessed the house and reassured me that the church would protect us. I don't think he believed me. I went to a witch for a protection spell, and she gave me some herbs to spread in the house. Before that 3rd day arrived, both of our girls went to God. We found them lifeless in their cribs on the morning we were meant to leave. Our hearts were broken, and we knew that that devil woman in white had taken our 2 little angels. It seemed that Colette had tried to warn others about the woman in white, but they thought she was mad. She was even accused of murdering her own children and would not return to Paris for fear of persecution. After the Moreau family had sold the house, 2 other families attempted living there, and one after the other, each family experienced the same inexplicable and abrupt loss of their young children. For a time, the house stood vacant, with locals refusing to buy such a cursed home. Finally, in the 1960s, a bachelor professor of history bought the house and also reported seeing a beautiful woman dressed in pre-French Revolutionary clothes. The house had 3 floors, and he would frequently see her on the stairs or standing by a window, looking out at the park below. When his neighbors asked about the haunting, he would laugh and say, She flatters me. What do I care? I have no children. He said she appears to him in all her beautiful finery, and even tries to tempt him with her beauty. He decided to research this beautiful woman that seemed attached to his home, and found evidence of a 1780s French socialite, Gabrielle Dubois. She was beautiful, by all accounts, but cruel. She treated her servants so badly that even the other aristocratic families did not accept her well. They did, however, come to her decadent parties. Gabrielle cared little for the plight of those begging for food just beyond her courtyard gates. She eventually had a baby, but motherhood only made her worse. She handed off her baby to the servants to care for. She felt weighed down by motherhood and resented her husband for the freedoms he enjoyed as a man whose life hadn't changed in the slightest with fatherhood. When the French Revolution began and the mobs finally breached her home, her husband had been away on business, leaving Gabrielle home with the baby. Gabrielle had tried to escape the house, running towards the back door away from the mob, but she was caught. She offered the baby to them if they would let her live and escape. They did take the baby, but Gabrielle never again left that house alive. The professor read Colette's memoir and learned that the herbs placed in the house as a protection spell were done so to keep Gabrielle's spirit within the house. After all this time, Gabrielle was trapped in the house, and she blamed children for her imprisonment. The professor was getting older and knew that when he passed, the house and Gabrielle would need new caretakers. He decided to pass it on to his university as a gift. Perhaps they would make it a residence for another professor or an administrative building. He left explicit instructions in a letter for the next resident. No children should visit or live in the home, and the property walls should not be breached for construction of any kind. He hoped that Gabrielle would remain harmless if there were no children involved, and the house remained sealed with the spell. When the professor eventually passed away in 1976, ownership of the property passed to the university, and during the process, the letter he had painstakingly written was lost. The university offered the house to a new professor, fresh from Britain, who had just accepted a teaching position. The young professor, eager to have the house to his liking, commissioned laborers to build an addition onto the house, extending from the back with a view of the beautiful park. Once construction was completed, he moved in. With his large family, 3 young sons and 2 baby daughters, the addition was to be the new nursery. If you enjoyed that story, I'm glad you found me. I tell creepy stories about scary encounters and paranormal events. If this is your thing too, stay, listen, and subscribe to Lady Grimm for more stories. It's okay to keep the lights on. Let me tell you another story. My father was a farm worker for a large corporate food manufacturer. He was one of thousands of workers who picked fruit in California for decades. He used to tell us about La Campesina, who would appear to laborers when someone in their midst was being threatened with death or harm. La Campesina is a tall woman dressed in laborer clothing who appears usually at dusk as a warning. The legend of this woman has grown so much over the years that the farm owners fear her presence when the workers report seeing her. According to the legend, this woman, this now unquiet spirit who appears as a warning, was once a young woman who worked on the big farm. The farm was owned by the corporation, but was overseen by a manager who had a great deal of authority over the laborers. He would assign them housing, transportation to and from the fields, and would even regulate when they would eat and have breaks. The farm manager took a special interest in this particular woman because she was beautiful and graceful and proud. At first, it was just little comments, compliments, and glances, but then he became more insistent, touching her hair as she left the bus, or asking to speak with her privately. Eventually, he tried to corner her, separating her from the rest of the workers, so he could proposition her with better food and better accommodations if she would sleep with him. She refused him continually, but over the course of several weeks he persisted. Finally, he became aggressive and attempted to take what he wanted by force. Cornered and alone, she hit him hard across the head with a rock, and he stumbled. She thought she could run around him, but he grabbed her, took out his knife, and ended her life. Before she died, she cursed him and the land. 2 weeks later, that manager was found dead in his car, wrapped around a tree at the farm's large entrance gate. Since then, other events have brought out La Campesina. There was an old drunk bus driver that used to transport laborers around the farm. The workers complained to the new manager, but were ignored. One night, with the bus full of laborers, the drunk bus driver took a turn too sharply and drove into oncoming traffic. He killed himself, all 43 workers in the bus, and the driver of the other car. Just before that had happened, the workers had seen La Campesina in and around the bus. On another occasion, a tractor used to move the gathered produce was trapped in the mud as a result of poor driving by one of the managers. When workers tried to free it, La Campesina appeared in the field just before them. When the tractor was freed, one of the workers was crushed by the large tread and lost his left arm. 5 days later, that manager driving the tractor was hit by a drunk driver and killed. A few years ago, management announced they were going to cut pay temporarily. Sightings of La Campesina increased, and the workers became so agitated by her appearance that management reverted back to the higher wage just to keep everybody from leaving. When my father was still working on the farm, La Campesina appeared directly in front of him. He was so startled by her that he fell backwards. She looked at him for an instant, and when she disappeared, he saw a venomous snake slithering away from where he had been about to step. The stories are endless. She appears as a protector or a shield for the workers, and enacts justice for those with no voices. It may sound crazy, but that farm was under her protection. Whether management believed in her or not, they believed the workers' belief in her. If the workers were agitated or believed something bad was going to happen because she had appeared, production declined. Management learned to respect La Campesina. If not in life, they did so in death. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to travel to Ireland to study the Great Hunger of 1845 to 1852. History has called it the Irish Potato Famine, but this is a whitewashed term for genocide of an entire nation. We were to travel to Dublin, and then we were to stay in Cork for a couple of weeks before returning back to the States. The paranormal encounter I'm going to tell you about happened during my time in that stone cottage. Dublin was beautiful, and we learned a great deal at Trinity College. But now it was time to get out into the countryside where the greatest impacts of the Great Hunger were felt. It was November, and the weather was getting colder and darker as winter was setting in. Not the ideal time to visit Ireland, but the trip aligned with the end of the semester. We left Dublin in the early afternoon and arrived in Cork to catch a bus to the cottages where we were booked. There were 4 rustic, cute stone cottages on the property, set about 100 feet apart from each other. Our group of 8 were to divide up and share the cottages. My friend Evie and I bunked together. As we walked towards the easternmost stone cottage from where the bus had left us, we saw a woman and 2 children walking through the field between our cottage and the next one. We called out to them, but they were far away and didn't turn. I reached for my phone to take a quick picture of the cottages, and when I looked back up, the woman and the children were gone. There was a set of small trees about 50 feet away, and I figured they had just walked behind them towards the next property. I dismissed it. The possibility that they were spirits had not even entered my thoughts. Evie unlocked the door, and we heard a safety chime as the door opened. We stepped inside. The house was adorable. It was a small stone cottage with a loft, a stone fireplace facing the loft. There was a bathroom with a shower in the corner, and in the loft above there were 2 comfortable-looking double beds. I lit the fireplace straight away as the air felt damp inside. Looking around, we saw a back door which led to a small patio. There were 2 chairs and a small table just outside the door. Beyond the patio, there extended a long field of green, lush grass. Even though it was threatening rain, it was beautiful. We unpacked from the bus ride, getting settled into our new home away from home for the next 2 weeks. The rental had some snacks available, and of course, tea. Evie made some tea, and we sat down with the crackers to look at the local brochures left by the rental owner. The rain started pouring outside. It was a steady, hard rain. Almost immediately, we heard what sounded like tapping, and turned to look at the back door. The window in the door revealed nothing but rain. We decided to get showered and rested before dinner. I showered first and then climbed up the loft stairs to my bed. I heard Evie close the bathroom door below, and I drifted off to sleep. What seemed like a moment later, I heard the door chime. I opened my eyes and I heard the shower still running behind the closed bathroom door. I sat straight up in bed and turned to look over the loft edge. There was nobody there. I crept over to the loft stairs and looked down, but the house was quiet, aside from the water from the shower. The doors were closed, and there was no sign of anyone. A quick scan of the room, and I noticed the crackers we had left on the plate were gone. There were crumbs on the floor and near the back door. I immediately opened the back door and looked out, and saw nothing but rain. I figured I'd imagined it, as I was half asleep, and maybe Evie had eaten the crackers on the way into the bathroom. I checked the locks on the doors and climbed back up the stairs to my soft, cozy bed. My alarm went off at 6 p.m., and I woke Evie up, who was now fast asleep in her bed. We got dressed for dinner and walked to the pub for dinner with the rest of the group. As we walked, I asked Evie if she had finished the crackers. She said she thought I had finished them. I told her what had happened with the door while she was in the bathroom, and she looked a little spooked. Maybe we have a hungry ghost? she asked, laughing nervously. The pub was great. We stayed for a few hours, and the locals teased us, saying we were staying in the haunted cottages. There's spirits all around these parts. You best leave some food outside, or someone's gonna see something, they joked. Evie and I half laughed and looked at each other, remembering the crackers. We left the pub around 11 and were talking loudly when we realized how quiet everything was around us. There were several houses on the road back to the cottages, but they were mostly dark. It was late for a Tuesday night. It was also pretty chilly and damp. The road closed in just ahead under some large trees, and we could see the moonlight streaming through. Definitely creepy, but also beautiful. As we walked quietly now, we saw movement ahead. A woman, wearing a long dress, was ahead of us, crossing the road. Her clothes were dark, and we almost missed her, but for the moonlight. We stopped abruptly and watched. She turned, looked straight at us. Her thin face looked weathered and gaunt. She turned away and finished walking across the road into the darkness. Evie grabbed my arm and we walked quietly together. We were pretty freaked out because there was really nothing but farmland where the woman had gone, and it was so dark. There were no lights beyond the edge of that road at all. We couldn't see her in the field beyond. We had to pass right by that spot and hurried through, almost running at this point. Something about that woman did not feel normal, and she made us very uncomfortable. We made it to the cottage and turned on all the lights. We got ready for bed, and I noticed for the first time that there was no curtain on the back door window. Having just seen that lady less than a mile away made us pretty nervous. With the lights on, anyone could see into the cottage, but all we could see was darkness. We stayed up a little longer and talked about the area and the history of the Great Hunger. So much of the devastation had happened right here. This cottage could have been the former home of someone that died of starvation or who had been evicted. It was a sobering thought, and we called it a night. I became conscious of the tapping first. It was insistent and steady. I rolled over and looked at my phone. It was 3:15 a.m. I wanted to pull the covers over my head and just go back to sleep, but my instincts kicked in and I became more aware. I sat up and called for Evie. The tapping continued. Evie woke up quietly and turned in her bed. Her eyes were wide as she heard the tapping too. I motioned to her quietly that I was going to go downstairs. She followed me to the top of the stairs. I crept down the steps, the tapping getting louder as I got closer to the bottom. I reached the last step and faced the door. I will never forget what I saw that night. There was a terrifying face at the window, a man, but no longer a man. He was gaunt and horrible and desperate, and I stumbled backwards, almost falling over. When he saw me, the tapping stopped, and he disappeared. "Oh my God!" I cried as Evie ran down the steps. I told her what I had seen, and she went to the door, pulling a chair against it and checking the lock. She checked the front door lock, too. It was another half hour before we could go back to sleep. There was no doubt in my mind that I had seen something paranormal. Nothing happened for the next few days. We walked the countryside and saw landmarks of the events we had studied all semester. We were often moved to tears at the sheer horror of what had happened there so long ago. The morning we were scheduled to leave for the airport, we were up early, just as the sun was coming up. We had packed the night before as our flight was an early one. I made some tea and wanted to sit on the back patio and watch the sunrise on my last morning in Ireland. I wrapped myself in a warm blanket to shield myself from the cold damp and sat warming my hands around the hot cup. When I looked up, I saw 3 shapes in the field beyond, the shapes of a woman and 2 children. They were skeletal and gray, their clothes just hanging off their skinny, lifeless bodies. They continued walking towards the cottage, and I sat frozen in my chair. They stopped, and I remembered what the men at the pub had said. I ran back inside and grabbed some bread and the tea that was left in the teapot. I set everything on the table and ran back inside, closing and locking the door. I ran upstairs, where Evie was still getting ready. I jumped on her bed and told her what happened. We waited silently inside for another few minutes, until the call came that the bus had arrived to pick us up for the airport. We grabbed our bags and peered nervously out the front door. We started towards the road, but I couldn't leave without knowing. Wait, I just have to see. Evie tried to stop me, but I ran behind the cottage and looked at the patio. The bread and tea were gone. In their place, there was a sprig of tiny white bittercress flowers. I only wished that instead of bits of bread and tea, I could give them peace.